companies and why they're important for people. Let me ask you guys this. When you folks leave your house in your own home, do you turn off all the lights?
Yes.
Why?
Saves energy.
It says that, why do you care that it saves energy, Amanda?
Because it costs money to buy electricity.
Perfect. So it costs you money, it saves energy, you don't do it. So kind of on the same point, just like kind of Amanda brought up this idea of, let's think of water, okay? Hot water, because it's a double whammy on energy. Water is a natural resource that will eventually run out, okay, or not run out completely, but it's something we need to conserve and think about a little bit better. And so kind of like Amanda said, we don't leave the tap on and go run a grocery, run or go outside, hang out in the backyard for a couple hours and come back and turn off the water. Think of hot water, not just regular water. So hot water, not only are you paying for the water and wasting this precious natural resource, but you're also heating it. Right. And so you're burning fossil fuels, or you're burning energy, consuming energy to heat it. And then again, you're just flushing it down the drain. So I agree with Amanda. We don't do it because it's costs us money. We pay the bill at home. So let me ask you this. When you go to a hotel, you don't pay the energy bill. You don't pay the water bill. Do you go into your room, turn on the hot water tap in the tub, actually the tub, because those are made to be high flow rate water faucet, so it actually goes through a lot of water very quickly. Leave the sink open, or the tub, don't close the tub so the water just drains down. Turn on the hot water and go have dinner and come back to your hotel room. Do we do that?
Of course not.
But why not? We're not paying the bill. It doesn't cost me a dime. At the hotel, whatever I pay at the hotel, $150, $160, it's the same whether I use 0 gallons of water or 10,000 gallons of water if that thing's running the whole day. But why don't I do it?
It's wasteful.
It's wasteful. So I feel bad about it. I feel wrong. I feel like there's some issue, there's some concern. Maybe this is why I shouldn't do it. And I agree 100% with you, Amanda, on that. So now I want you to think of who the most, and nobody needs to answer this. So think of who you imagine to be the most evil human in the world, or the most evil leader of a corporation, or any company that you think would be evil or bad. The CEO, the leader of that organization. Do you think when he or she, when they check in to a hotel, do they turn on the hot water and go have dinner and come back? Because they're so evil, they don't care about wastefulness. They're like, screw the environment. What do I care about? And the answer most probably is not. Like, no matter how evil a person is, or how bad you think they are, or lead a horrible organization, they don't do that, right? They kind of, like Amanda said, it just feels wrong. You don't do it at home because you pay the bill, but even in a hotel, you're not going to do it because it just feels wrong. It feels like you're not doing it. So based on that, now we know that they're not doing it. The main argument I want you to take away with today is that organizations don't think about sustainability, or don't consider sustainability in their finances, because they don't truly understand the value, the financial impact, the natural environment impact, the resources impact of whatever decision they're doing. Okay, they don't care that they're using a lot of water because they don't understand that water is a resource that's very precious. They don't care about energy conservation because they don't understand, as they're paying for the bill, what impact that has on their bottom line. Okay, so all these things that would impact us, that would drive us as individuals, are the same things that would impact a company, impact an organization. Okay, so with that, I'll tell you a little bit about what I want you to take away today. So I hope you understand what business sustainability is, understand a few current systems that are in place and what their goal, what their objective is, and understand how to measure and quantify the impact that you have. This is me. I looked a little bit different during COVID, but now that we're back to whatever the new normal is, I kind of look more or less the same. I'm an associate professor of operations and supply chain management at the Kelley School of Business on our Indianapolis campus, and I'm also the executive director of the IU Business Sustainability and Innovation Lab. I've been blessed to be the PI on kind of few grants, and so I'm happy to speak to anybody that's interested or wants to kind of talk about that. I think at least in the business schools, the environment is changing, or the how we operate is changing, and I think grants are going to play more and more role, especially as we get this public-private partnership. So when I talk about grants, it's not always just government related, but there's a lot of engagement that you can do with organizations, with companies outside academia. So I've been blessed to spend a lot of time, what I call in the field, okay? And in the field is working with companies, helping them understand a little bit more about sustainability, helping them think about how can they address sustainability, what does that look like? And I heard, the wonderful introduction that I got in the beginning, but we measure what we look at, okay? So we measure it as thinking about the amount of energy that you save, okay? And this means something, right? Every time we change the way we do it, right? And just think of your own home. So if you're used to, as a family or as an individual, you're used to using, 200 gallons a month. If we're able to bring that down to 100 gallons by having conversations about when you turn on and turn off the taps, having conversations about changing our shower heads, actually changing fixtures like your toilets and other things. If we can bring that 200 gallons down to 100 gallons, that's 100 gallons you saved a month times 12 months a year, that's 1,200 gallons. So that's kind of the impact when we talk about, we measure the impact of the sustainability practices you have and change. So not only do they have an impact on the environment that we can measure, there's also a cost associated with it, right? When you reduce that 100 gallons a month, there's the cost associated with that, just like there'd be the cost associated with the energy reduction. So kind of jumping into that, let's think about how we measure business performance. And, I know some of you folks, excuse me, some of you folks measure, teach business or work various business elements. So let me ask you folks, how do we measure business performance? No takers out there?
I'm guessing profits.
Profits, yeah, perfect. Thank you, Kathleen. Amanda, sorry, you were saying something?
No, I was saying I didn't see anybody responding in the chat. Please unmute and chime in if you've got an answer.
So profits, Kathleen, that's a great start. Anything else we use to measure business performance?
I believe you use KPIs.
The KPIs, so are they hitting on certain KPIs or not? Perfect, thank you, Franklin.
Well, basically you have, you can use strategic KPIs, or you can use, we say departmental KPIs, and you have production KPIs. Some of those things are used in measuring performance.
Perfect. Exactly. I agree with kind of all those things that Franklin said. So he gave us like 3 examples and probably a subset, maybe 5 or 6 under each of those categories. So 15 things. We got profits. What about stock price?
Yeah.
What about revenue increase? What about market share? What about change in market share? What about increase in profitability? What about if you're a private company, maybe going public? What about shareholder value? Okay, and the goal that I want you to understand is business performance, which is in our mind very binary, right? Like a company makes a lot of money, doesn't make a lot of money, is very fluid. Okay, there's a lot of ways to measure business performance. There's a lot of different things for us to look at. There's a lot of different elements. And as you consider this, you figure out that, okay, business performance is difficult, just financial performance is difficult to look at and understand. So as a result, as you think about that, business sustainability is also difficult to look at, difficult to measure, difficult to understand. But just like the KPIs that Franklin mentioned, there's things that we can look at, categories, and we can measure, are we measuring against this category or that category? And these are the things that I hope you kind of take away with. So we're going to talk about all these elements as we kind of cover them. These are a lot of buzzwords that are used in sustainability. So I'm just kind of putting them out there, but sustainable development, SD, which means how do we operate in an environment or allow us as a society, as organizations, as individuals to work and be able to advance, grow, improve, while still not taking the planet outside the planetary boundaries. Okay, still kind of being able to operate in what we can operate. CSR stands for corporate social responsibility, and that's the business element, the business side of how businesses, organizations manage that CSR. Okay, so it's how businesses, organizations manage their footprint within sustainable development to stay kind of within the boundaries. ESG is another buzzword that you probably all have been hearing recently. It stands for environmental, social, and governance issues. So these are the issues that are typically falling under a CSR strategy. These are the categories, like Franklin mentioned. I want you to think about them in buckets. Okay, there's three major buckets or KPIs or categories of issues that a company can look at. One is environment, understanding the impact that we are having on the environment. Okay, how much water are we drawing? How much energy are we consuming? How much waste are we generating? What happens to our plastic when we put in? What are we polluting our rivers? Okay, that's the environmental impact, and you can measure a lot of different KPIs on that. Societal impact, how, what does our DEI strategy look like? How are we having a positive impact on individuals? Where are we sourcing our raw materials? Is there any child labor or slave labor in our supply chains as we source materials overseas? These are the kind of things that fall under the social category. And then governance is, how are we running as an organization? How do we talk about what we're doing to our stakeholders? How do we have this conversation with individuals? And so that kind of gets us to this idea of the triple bottom line. And the triple bottom line pretty much just talks about how we get, you think of financial performance as one element, and we've already agreed there's different ways you measure financial performance and how you get that. So we'd also measure environmental performance, and then we'd also measure societal performance. And these three things come together to talk about the triple bottom line. So rather than just saying, what's the bottom line? What's the triple bottom line? Because there's a trade-off sometimes between financial performance and environmental impact, right? If we're going to clean the water a little bit before we put it out into the river so it's less polluting, we might have to put in a machine. That machine might cost us money. And putting that machine that costs us a little bit of money might drive our profits down a little bit. The Paris Accord, it talks about how we need to keep everything within 1.5 degrees, meaning since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, that the temperature on planet Earth can only increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is about, I think, almost just shy of 2 Fahrenheit. So we can remain within the planetary boundaries, because if we expand beyond that, okay, the temperature increase goes beyond that, then there might be irreparable damage to the planet, sort of catastrophic climate events start kicking in. Circular value chain is where organizations, where right now when we talk about a supply chain, we talk about the take, make, dispose, right? You buy something, you use it because somebody makes something into it, you use it, and then you throw it away. The circular value chain says, let's think about it a little bit different. How can you, instead of continuing to source materials from the planet, or continuing to make, stopping, drawing new materials, how can we close the value chain on that circular value chain? So a word that's used in the industry is virgin, so virgin plastics or virgin metal or virgin wood pulp. And so are we, pulling more oil out to run a plastics factory so we can have virgin plastic, that we make that into something else? Or do we have plastic that we collect? Before COVID, the term was, it still is the term, PCR, post-consumer recyclable. Okay, so if you look at the content of a lot of our materials in the US for plastic right now, we recycle between 5 to 8%. That's very low. Okay, so you think about that. Almost anything you buy that has plastic, about at best case scenario, it's 92% virgin plastic, instead of it being almost 100% PCR, post-consumer recyclable plastic, where it's not virgin plastic. So then you get kind of into this, to become a truly regenerative company. And it's one that adds and generates more to the environment than it takes away. So how do we measure? We need to report on what's important. What can you look at? What can you understand that's a little important? So we have trouble defining and agreeing on a lot of metrics. So the goal, again, we're still new in this journey. We've had businesses and public stock markets for hundreds of years, right? Companies have existed for hundreds of years and nobody could give us one metric that we should measure. And it's unfortunate that we want the same expectation for sustainability. Okay, we just started looking at this 30, 40 years ago. Okay, 10 years ago, it's become part of the conversations for the average person. And so to say that, oh, I want the one metric, that's hard. But right now, a lot of us are focusing on greenhouse gas emissions or GHG emissions. But we need to understand there's others that are related to other types of emissions, waste generation, and water extraction, and kind of what does that look like? And I learned this sometime in middle school, high school, whenever they teach this to people, but people forget that there's a water cycle, right? And so if we pollute water that's in our discharge, it's going to end up somewhere. And right now, the systems have been able to deal with it, right? The oil, think about like the oil that's coming out of a boat or something that leaks, right? It's through normal operations, not through like an accident or something, just through normal running. And as a human population continues to grow and expand, we're going to get to some tipping point where the oceans, the earth, it just won't be able to keep up. And then you're going to have this catastrophic failure that we talk about, right? And so we want to talk a little bit about what the current systems are in place and how we measure and report on business sustainability. So there's a number of organizations that have established frameworks that have looked at kind of how we measure that. The biggest one, I'm going to talk about that a little bit, is the UN SDGs, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And these are 17 goals that try and help us set a standard for us to look at, how businesses can think about their operations and sustainability beyond what they're own running. So CDP is actually their new name, but it used to be the Carbon Disclosure Project. And the goal was to try and get companies to just disclose how much carbon they're emitting, or at least have the conversation to think about how much carbon they're emitting. Okay, the best way is that, if I look at all 36 of us on this call, if I was to ask, well, how much water do you consume on average per person in your household? Okay, very few people have that number. But if I ask you all, please write that number and bring, let's talk about it next week, or email it to this specific email address. That would drive the conversation. Now that you're reporting and talking about it, you're like, well, why are we using this much water? Is that higher or lower than my peers? Is that higher or lower than, a family with teenagers? Is that higher or lower than some subset? And so you want to get to idea to normalize. And as soon as you start disclosing things, you start asking yourself the question, well, am I better or worse? How can I change? How can I improve? And so that's the goal of what the CDP is trying to do. And so there's also a bunch of these reporting organizations, agencies that are trying to kind of set standards to help people talk about sustainability and talking about it. So we want to talk a little bit about net zero. And so net zero, I want you to think about is how much carbon emissions a company generates. And so there's a number of different, right? If you think about your own household, I want you to think about, it's easier to think about your household, and you can kind of apply that to an organization. So if I think of my household, we have gas vehicles. And so just running the gas vehicles, there's CO2 that's emitted on that. I can measure how much that is. I know what my MPG is. I know how many miles I drive my cars every year. And I know how many CO2 pounds are emitted for every mile that's driven. And so I can very quickly calculate, okay, I know how much CO2 I'm emitting from my cars. I also know where I buy my electricity. Duke in Indiana, AES, they have a different profile, so you can get what the profile is. You can also buy renewable energy that feeds into the grid, or you can put in solar panels on your own roof. And so now I don't need to buy energy from Duke or AES or somebody else, but I still use natural gas, to run my boiler, right, for the hot water. So we have hot water. So now I know how much CO2 I'm emitting. So I can change what I'm doing there. I can swap out the natural gas boiler to an electric boiler. It's called electrification. That's the electrification process. So I can try and electrify more and more things in my house. So to completely eliminate the need for natural gas. And then now I can change how I source the electricity, right? So instead of buying from a utility that is fossil-based fuels, I can buy from a utility that is has a lot of renewable energy, or I can generate my own energy on house. I can have solar roof panels and kind of try and decrease my carbon emissions. But maybe let's say I've got a real old car, it's got a lot of sentimental value. I don't want to get rid of that. So there's some things I can't truly get to zero. So what I do is I would buy offsets. Okay, so if there's something I cannot get rid of, I don't want, I would buy an offset to change that. So at the end, I would have, I know what my contributions are, and then I would offset to have kind of net zero. And the goal is a lot of companies are talking about being net zero by 2050 or 2040. So 2040 is when we need, really, everybody needs to be net zero by then. So we, avoid this catastrophic failure. And so in the US, what does that look like? So we need to increase solar and wind capacity 3.5 times, which is not that hard considering how much we've increased over the last little. Eliminate most generation from coal. Okay, we need to have some nat gas. We saw what's happening in Europe, some nat gas for backup reliability, but increase zero emissions, not electric vehicles only, but zero emission vehicles. Increase the sales of heat pumps to 50%. So heat pumps are another way, instead of having a natural gas furnace, you can have a heat pump. It works in about, unless you're in ultra cold climates, so really, North Dakota, Northern Michigan, the UP, some parts of Maine, a lot of places in the country can have heat pumps work effectively. You are right, in the 80s, the technology was a little bit different, but in 2022, the technology works in most cold places. And then this idea of energy efficiency. So not only do we need to decrease the amount, change where we're sourcing our energy, we need to use less of it. So then we talk about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. I'm going to talk about it from, again, your personal individual. Think about you as an individual. The same thing applies for a company, right? You have your house. You know how much energy you're consuming in your house, and you have your vehicles. You know how much energy you're consuming in your vehicles. That is your scope 1 emissions. How much emissions are related directly to your personal performance. And so if I compare my household to a different household, right, I know, okay, if that other household has electric vehicles, their CO2 emissions is going to be lower than ours. Maybe we're more efficient. We changed, we electrified, instead of a natural gas furnace, we electrified to heat pumps. So we are more efficient in that. And then kind of that allows you to compare. Scope 1. Scope 2 is the electricity, steam, heating, and cooling that you purchase from a utility provider or purchase from other people. What does that look like? That's scope 2. Scope 3 is everything that's related to upstream and downstream. And there's actually 15 categories of them. So the first category is your purchased goods and services. So when you buy a good, when you buy a product, what is the CO2 emissions that's the result of that? What waste you're generating, any travel that you run as an individual, obviously as a business, it'll be the business travel, okay? And then end of life treatment of sold products, where is it? Disposal of products as well is a category, right? So you think about it, okay, if I generate something or I use something, do I just put it in the garbage and then there's some CO2 emissions that's a result of that? Or can it kind of go back into the value chain of what comes in? So cement is one of the largest contributors to our overall CO2 emissions. So that's kind of what makes sense. Okay, if there's a building that's already up, instead of tearing it down, can we use the structure itself there, use the cement, use that material in our. So why should businesses care? Why should individuals care? 80% of executives said that it will have an impact on how they're going to run, on what they're going to do. There is going to be a scarcity of natural resources and how that impacts us. You avoid regulatory, political uncertainty issues, and so that helps you a lot. You also lower your insurance costs, okay? And then you prevent this reputational damage. Now, what happens is you become an organization that's more connected, more suited. People respond to that a little bit better. But instead of just thinking of the negatives, I also want us to think of the positives. There's a lot of value add that comes around being a sustainable company. This idea of top line growth, the more you're involved, the more revenue, the more money you can make, because customers buy and reward companies and products that make things that have a better impact. And so they're more willing to be engaged. You also reduce your costs, right? We talked about that in the beginning. The reason we save energy is we're able to lower our costs. And so kind of the same thing, if the company is able to manufacture a product using less energy, they're saving that money, okay? Especially now with today's astronomical energy prices. They also have a lower need for regulatory and legal interventions. You have more productive employees. So there's a lot of research out there that shows that when employees talk about sustainability or engage with companies or organizations that are involved in sustainability, they are more likely to be attracted to that organization, and they're more willing to work harder, stay longer hours, go beyond, because it's a company they believe in, because it's this issue of sustainability. And then this idea that you have a better ROI because capital gets allocated into better resources. So what can you do? Where can you start? And how can you integrate this into your teaching, into your class, and into just our general conversations and lexicon? So we want to talk about this idea of a materiality matrix. And a materiality is a concept with many definitions, but it's used in finance and sustainability. And a sustainability materiality assessment is the process of identifying material or important topics by their significance to stakeholders and the financial risk that they pose to investors. Okay, once we've identified those topics, then we can start setting goals and we can talk about trajectories. And so these are the UN SDGs, and these are the 17 categories. And these are always a great place to begin to talk about, well, what are the things that we should focus in on? What are the different things we can look at, and how can we have an impact? And as an organization, it's very difficult to look at all 17 at the same time. It's very difficult to push hard at 17. That's kind of where the materiality matrix kind of comes in and has an impact. So what you do is you want to look at your stakeholders. So who are your stakeholders? What are they doing? So you want to look at this is kind of a typical list of stakeholders and how they're engaged in the organization and the impact that they have. And so you want to go about in an exercise where you talk to your stakeholders so they help you understand, okay, well, what are you looking at? You know, what can you do? And so these are two examples. This is Heineken, and the next one we're going to have is, I believe this is Cisco. Yes, it is Cisco. So what you do is you map the issues on the importance and the potential impact to you as an organization, okay, the financial impact, and then the importance to the stakeholders. And what you do is you plot them on this straightforward 2x2 now, and you think about, okay, what's most important? And I can only focus on so much, and that's what goes in the top right corner. And that's what you kind of spend a lot of your time and energy on. And, you know, the ones on the bottom left, it's not that they're bad. It's just that this cannot be a point of focus for your organization at this time. And it's kind of the same thing here. What's the importance for stakeholders? What's the important for business? This is another one from Cisco as they look at it. So how do you go about talking about sustainability or looking at it? You want to engage your stakeholders before you need to. You want to be able to start this conversation, start this dialogue before you need to worry about it. You want to work with partners to establish a dialogue, you know, engage with the partners, see what they're looking at, what do they want, and you want to listen to different stakeholder groups. In the beginning, as you're building the materiality matrix, you want to cast your net out wide, right? You want to make sure you're talking to everybody, you're looking at everybody, and kind of one of the big things or the big issues that drive some of that. You want to make sure you're transparent and understand that engagement is a continuous process. It's not a thing that happens at one point in time. It's a journey. And so how do you develop your skills as you go about this journey? How does that look like? And so something you might have heard of before is something called a life cycle assessment, or an LCA. It's got an ISO standard 14040. The idea of a circular value chain is understanding the impact of a product over its entire life. And so as you think of, if I'm designing a product, let's say this pen here I'm holding, you know, not only do I think about, well, how I make it, but I also think about how it's being used, how it will be disposed. And then the other side of the supply chain, where are the raw materials sourced from? What do we do? What do they look like? And so just for lack of a better example, we all use pens, and we all know kind of how the ink flows out of it. And what if I could, I am not a pen engineer by training, but if I was a pen engineer, you know how sometimes the ink dries on it or stops working. And so we tend to toss out pens that have like almost 50, 60, sometimes more % of the ink that's in there. And so what if I could develop a way that would cost increase the price of the pen by 10%, but change the way, ensure that it never stops flowing until the ink is completely consumed. Okay, so this is something that would cost a little bit more for the company, cost about 10% or as an arbitrary number, but I know that it would work 100% of the time all the way down the road. And so now this company can charge a little bit more for it, right? Could charge 10% more than it was charging before. It's a $2 pen. So, they charge $2.20. Okay, it would cost them a little bit more. And so, how do they go about using that, figuring that out? And then that drives down the impact they have on the environment, right? They might be using a little bit more energy when they're consuming it, but that ink, the vast majority of that, remember 50, 60% of the ink that ends up in landfill, that gets to stay in, that gets consumed. It adds value. I use it for writing on paper. That's the reason I bought the pen, so I can use the ink to write on paper. And this is the idea of life cycle assessment. It's trying to help somebody understand the overall value of the product over its life cycle. So as you start talking about sustainability and you start talking about the issues you want to look at, we need to understand that we need to look at all greenhouse gas emissions, not just CO2. Okay, we need to understand what waste we're generating in our facility and what's happening with that waste. We need to understand our water usage and how we use water. What are we doing with the wastewater? A lot of people look at and kind of understand, think about the water that's being consumed, but there's water that is not used completely and it goes back into the environment. How dirty is it? What does that look like? What are we doing? We need to understand all the climate risks, not just emissions. How much raw plastic, raw steel are we using? Remember, we talked about this concept about virgin raw materials. Okay, why can they not be post-consumer? Why, when you think about only 8% of our plastics actually get recycled? Okay, this is for years now we've been recycling. Why is it so low? How can we kind of change this process? What percentage of our raw materials are recyclable? So if we're making a product, we're making this pen, how do we ensure that all the materials, everything that's in it goes into the recycling or is recyclable, right? And then how do we encourage recycling so we can change having more products that are post-consumer recyclables, more PCR in our own products, so we can kind of drive that conversation. And then I don't have a slide on that, but the societal impact. There's huge societal impacts that a company or organization can have. What are the societal impacts? What do they look like? What are all the elements that are related to that? And so how do you go about doing that? Once you figure out what's important, once you figure out the categories, you need to establish baselines. Okay, you need to make sure that your calculations are repeatable, auditable, and consistent. So we know, we all agree, okay, we consume this much gallons of water. Let's go back to the gallons of water at a house, or kilowatts of electricity per person in a house. How do we know that they're repeatable? Well, you look at the bill. I assume the bill company is correct. I assume the meter is correct. I use the bill every month. Okay, and so then I know that's repeatable. It's auditable. I can come check, right? I can show you my bill and you can say, yeah, okay, I agree with Amrou's assessment. Okay, I understand what it looks like. And consistent, if we're always going to use the utility bill, right? Unless I buy a different meter or I measure it my own way, it's got to be the same thing kind of that looks at that. And so the data that you get around sustainability helps the rest of the business, the rest of the organization look at, better understand sustainability. And then it makes the company more sustainable and longer lasting. Again, we need to care about this, not just because we care about the environment, not just because we care about society, but because at the end of the day, for an organization, for a business that has a material business impact. And once you start factoring that in, once you start considering that in, it really drives a lot of the conversation and a lot of things on the cost. Okay, so doing a scope 3 assessment or an LCA assessment is not a burden like some people look at. You're like, oh, I got to do more work. No, it just helps you understand what things are. Just like it's not a burden for me to ask, how many kilowatt hours do you use on average at home in the summer, in the winter, in the fall and spring? Okay, you need to, you know this. How many gallons of water do you use in your home? It's a burden the first time, maybe a burden the second time, but then all of a sudden you start understanding and that helps you be more competitive, right? You're going to use less water. You're going to try and encourage water conservation issues. You're going to drive down your water consumption, eventually saving you some money at the door and having an immensely positive impact on the environment. So What I was hoping to do today was help you understand a little bit about what business sustainability is and what businesses are looking for. I hope you understand the current goals and systems that are in place and what they're trying to do. And I hope you understand a little bit how you can measure and quantify the impact of business sustainability and what it looks like. So as you move forward, think about how you can think about sustainability a little bit differently, how you can integrate it in your coursework and kind of what that looks like. So, how do you go about executing? And just kind of as a recap, let's understand materiality, what's important for you. Let's collect data and understand the impact. We need to implement the strategy to where we know where we are. So we have some baseline, right? How many gallons of water are we consuming per person per day? Where do we want to be after having a conversation with others, knowing where we should be, understanding what the average in the country is, and then establish a glide path. If we're at 200 gallons right now and I want to take the household to 100, it's not going to be overnight, but it's going to be over some time. So, okay, so 2 months or let's talk about, in 10 months, I want us to be at 100. So that means every month, I expect us to go from 200 to 190 to 180 to 170 and so on to help kind of figure out this glide path and what it should look like. And then I can know, okay, I'm on track. I can't expect to be 200 for 9 months. And then that last month, I'm going to drop to 10 to 100. I know it's not going to work. I know I'm not going to deliver on that. And so that's going to be the important thing that you have. That's all the content I have. I'm happy to keep going. I got a couple of more supplementary slides. I can kind of give you some more examples. Or we can start opening it up for conversations, questions a little bit earlier. I'm fine with whatever you folks want.
Let's open it up for some questions. I had thought of some questions myself as we were listening, but I'll wait until we hear from everybody else.
All right.
Please unmute and chime in with any questions that you might have.
Kind of reminds me of being in class.
Anyone?
Yes.
Okay, I'll go if there's no one else. So you're arguing that being sustainable is cost effective and makes a company more competitive. And I guess I'm sort of struggling to believe that. Maybe it's true because I mean, as an observer, I notice companies have become very conscious about so many things. It actually shocks me, and I'm glad overall. But globally, is that really true? I mean, when they compete with companies in other parts of the world, who maybe are more focused on profit, although I still sort of believe they're all focused on profit. Does it hurt their competitiveness globally to, consider all of these environmental things?
Yeah, great question, Kathleen. You raised 2 points and I kind of want to make sure I hit on both of them. So first, I'm glad you and I agree that from a cost benefit scenario, being sustainable or thinking about sustainability, trying to address is better, right? Using more post-consumer recyclables rather than virgin plastics, that's going to save me money. That's going to make me kind of more rewarded. Using less energy, less water. You see that, and I agree. Now you're talking about the competitive landscape. So I want you to think, and again, you don't have to answer this, I don't want to put you on the spot, or I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but there are some people that simply don't care, okay? I agree with that. And so I want to ask you, if you were buying, again, let's go back to my pen example. If I was selling a pen and they're two similar pens, okay, they both write and they both, we said this is $2, so let's pretend this is $1.50, okay? And I gotta buy pens regularly, like I'm sure most of you, as my colleagues do. And so I have a choice now, okay? That not knowing anything else, Kathleen, you're right. I would pick, if they both write the same and they have the same kind of thing, impact and use, I might not know that this company is more sustainable or does more stuff, but dang it, this pen is $1.50. It does the same thing. It has the same amount of ink. So I tend to buy the $1.50. But what if I knew that this was made in a factory with child labor or slave labor? Okay. Now, for some consumers, they don't care. They just say, oh, this is $1.50. The other one is $2. I don't care where it's made, how it's made. I want to save the 50 cents. And that's fine for those individuals. But for a lot of people, that's not the case. I'm not saying you're paying a premium. I'm just saying I'd rather buy the $2 pen because I don't want to buy something that's made by 8-year-old kids, or I don't want to buy something that's made in labor camps. Okay. And so does everybody in the world care? No. Now, what's more important, what's happened in the last 5 years, and I think this is what you're talking about, Kathleen, is it's become much more visible. So maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you would look at it, you're like, I don't know why, but this pen costs $1.50. This one costs $2. Of course, I'm going to buy the $1.50 one. I don't want to waste my money at the store. But now, with technology, with Twitter, with all this thing that's available, and consumers understanding the word supply chain, okay, consumers understanding global competitiveness, I now, as a consumer, as the average consumer, will start to understand the reason this is $1.50 is because this is made by children. This is made by adults that are paid a living wage. $2, right? The $2 pen, adults being paid a living wage. The $1.50 pen is made by children that sleep in the place that are not going to go to school. I know that now. That information is more readily available to consumers. So when consumers make that choice, they cannot claim the ignorance. 5, 10 years ago, you're 100% correct. It was take a lot of effort, a lot of energy for me, like, oh, which one, where was it made? Do I really care? Do I really understand? Do I want to care? So I kind of, monkey no see, monkey no hear. I can kind of move on. But now I know everybody in the world is telling me this is the child labor one. So if a consumer makes that choice, that's on them. Are 100% of consumers going to select the $2 pen? No, I concede to that. But I'd love to know where those people work that say, oh, I don't care how it's made. Do they care how their own employer treats them? Do they care about where their family or what they're going to do? And then that kind of changes the conversation. This is the minority. The people that say, oh, I don't care about child labor. I don't care about global competitiveness. This idea, no, I just want the $1.50 pen. Before, when we did not have these conversations, we did not know about these things, they could claim ignorance, or we could all claim ignorance. We don't really know. But now we do. And to show you how kind of this links into what the government's changing and what we're already seeing, okay, is the act, the Supply Chain Slavery Act that was passed by the US government recently, that's saying really it was specifically targeting a region in China where we know there are forced labor camp manufacturing issues, okay? And so now the government is stepping in and saying, yeah, there might be a third pen that's for $1 that's coming in, but we know, that this is made in forced labor camps, and we're not even going to allow you to sell it in the US. So yes, in a global market, is there somebody that would buy this? Yes, but that's because they don't know any better. They don't know that the reason this is $1 is because it was made in a forced labor camp. And so again, this is not the 1950s. This is not the 1980s. This is not even the 2000s or 2010s. We now know a lot more. The average individual knows what the word supply chain is. I teach supply chain. I've been doing it for, I don't know, since 2005. Okay. I don't know how many years that is, but almost 20 years. But nobody used to know. People in business school would not know the word supply chain. Unless you were a supply chain major, you did not know what the word supply chain. I guarantee you 95% of the people on this call know what supply chain is. I guarantee you 95% of the average population knows what the word supply chain is now because of all that's going on with COVID. So they will now understand $2, $1.50, $1 that we don't even buy. We're not even allowed to buy. That's the reason we're not allowed to buy. Did I answer your question, Kathleen?
Yes, you did. It was very convincing, and it's heartening that is happening. And I mean, the individuals are making rational choices, and the decisions are good over time.
I have faith in humanity, and I do believe most people are rational. The reason they don't act rationally is they don't have all the information. And I think when you have more information, you're able to make more rational decisions. I think
yes,
Jennifer, you were trying to say something. Then I know Todd, your hand's up.
No, it was me.
Okay, go ahead,
my name
Horace.
is always Guillaume. I just want to make sure I actually, well, I just want to piggyback on what you just said to say that, okay, what do you think the G8 can do, or maybe G20 can do to ramify what you just said about the child labor? Because we do understand as customer, and then people, a lot of people still don't understand supply chains. They heard supply chain, they probably they hear global competitiveness, and also they been buy things, but they do not really know what is child labor. But from international business standpoints, or from people that's doing business, they really care about like making money, making profit. Think about, for instance, like we have a lot of people wearing like Nike shoe, the Nike shoes, and then people some in some places making like $52, $52. Probably some of them making like for a year, for a day. Some of them don't make not even close to make $52 a day. What do you think the government can do?
So the government, and this is where people kind of talk about the overreaching. Oris, if you don't mind, I'll stick with you. Can I go buy my used motor oil? Can I go dump it in the river?
Sure.
No, there's laws against that, right?
Well, the reason why, I mean,
there's specific laws against certain. I cannot take nuclear waste and just dig a hole in my backyard and just throw it in and walk around. There's legal regulations around it. And I guess what I'm trying to say, just like I am with the question, there are legal regulations around a lot of things. Okay, this is why when people talk about, well, the government steps in. The government already steps in. The government prevents me from buying, because I can go around, because companies pay a lot of money to dispose of used oil. I cannot go around in my truck, buy all the used oil, and then dump it in my backyard, or dump it in your backyard. Okay, or dump it not on your backyard, but maybe on the street, the public street next to your backyard. That's illegal. I'll go to jail for that. Okay, and so there are government regulations that restrict what we can do. And so I think to address this issue of child labor that you talked about, I think there's two things. The first is there are going to be certain regulations, just like the U.S. government passed this law, and it's very backed up by the National Association of American Manufacturers, which is a pro-business lobby. Very pro-business lobby that talks about, this child labor issue is bad coming out of China. How can we fix it? How can we address it? Okay. And so as you deal with that, so there's the government having some impact. It's not, government is stepping completely back. Government has some impact, but it's also educating the consumers. And this is where NGOs come in. This idea of a public-private partnership, this is where people just need to understand that, okay, now that you know what a supply chain is, and I think it lies on us to kind of help start that conversation. Now that you know what a supply chain is, do you understand that there's people making this product? Do you understand that there's, things that are happening? And there's some great documentaries that have come out that have really changed recently on this idea of what happens to plastic pollution and plastic waste, just like that drove the conversation on carbon emissions, that would need to exist in our regular conversation life to change the way we talk about child labor. Okay, and I think, again, this is where NGOs, I don't think this is something the government can dictate. I think the government has a role. It can be involved in certain things, like it's already involved in preventing me from dumping oil down the drain right outside your house, restricting me all the time. Okay, so government does restrict us, and we all kind of agree with some things that make sense. But maybe there are other things, other opportunities for it to be involved in certain things, like it set boundaries for other things. And then kind of move that now conversation to where do they draw value? How can NGOs be engaged? How can NGOs be involved to kind of push that? I hope I answered your question. If not, Oris, please unmute and let me know. But Todd?
Hey, thanks for taking my question. And hello from Georgia. I'm a professor of geography at Georgia Gwinnett College, but I did my PhD at IU in Bloomington. And so I miss Bloomington quite a lot, and Indianapolis. But I'd like to jump on the plastics question for a second. And are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, so you've mentioned it a couple of times, and as a geography professor, I'm interested in all things environmental, of course. But as we know, the plastics industry, and I think this is what you're referencing, has been very involved in, more concerned about public perception of recycling than actual recycling. So plastic items are marked with certain indicators on the bottom to make consumers believe that they're recyclable because they have a number on them and they have that little symbol. And what we now understand, at least I only have learned in the last couple of years, is that that's not true. That's simply a labeling mechanism. And part of the reason that we're recycling so little in this country is not because consumers aren't choosing to recycle. It's because consumers are misinformed about what can and can't be recycled. And that's completely created by the plastics industry collectively. And that's pretty well established, I think, by now. I think you would agree with me on that. So my question for you is to ask you for some inside information. It appears that you work with a lot of these companies on these initiatives. And what I'm curious to know, if you are able to share, is that when you work with them, how often are they truly concerned and willing to take decisive action? And how often are they more concerned about the public persona and simply handling that as a PR issue rather than dealing with the problem? And
so I'll kind of address the first point. So for those that don't know what Todd's talking about, I don't have anything plastic in front of me, but on the bottom of the plastic or any recyclable plastic specifically is that the three arrows that kind of go in a triangle, the circular triangle, and inside it there's a number. This is typically the type of plastic that is in. So I want to introduce two terms that'll help you kind of address what Todd is talking about. There's economically recyclable and technically recyclable. Technically, everything is recyclable. Absolutely everything is recyclable. I can only speak for Indiana, okay, and most places in Indiana. So it's only economically viable to recycle type 1 or type 2. So if you think about what's on the bottom of that plastic that you have, kind of going back to where Todd is, if it doesn't say 1 or 2, you might put it in the recycling bin, and eventually it goes to the recycler, but they kind of separate it and it tends to go into landfill. Okay, that's for most places in the world. Okay, so a lot of places they tell you don't even put it in the recycling bin if it's not 1 or 2. Okay, because they're just gonna do that at the recycling facility. So it kind of helps separate. We have this problem, and I think this is where Todd was getting at, this idea of wish cycling. Okay, so people get something, they're like, I'm not sure if it's recyclable or not, but I'll put it in the recycling bin and somehow magic will happen. It is going to end up being recycled. Okay, and then that's just not fair for us as an action to be involved in this wish cycling. I'll give you an example of this. Cardboard is recyclable. Paper is recyclable. Pizza boxes that have grease stains on them are not recyclable. Okay, they technically are recyclable, but economically they're not recyclable because what happens, that grease gets the rest of the batch dirty and it ruins a bigger batch. So they tend to immediately dispose of those. And this is kind of the same idea as we're thinking about wish cycling. You're like, I'm not sure if this jar or this thing's recyclable or not, but I'll put it in the recycling bin and some magic will happen. I'll wish cycle it. And so I hope we really kind of separate that thought out. Going on kind of to what answering Todd's second point is, do companies care? Companies care because consumers care. And when consumers care, that's what changes the conversation. So just like right now, Todd, we look at the bottom, we're like, oh, this is recyclable. I want to make sure I buy a product that has 1 or 2 on the back of it, of the recycling. So type 1 or type 2 plastic, because then I know it's recyclable. The second thing I want to consider is, we're going to start hearing about this, is what percentage of the plastic in the material we're buying is post-consumer or actual recycled rate. I know I see it on boxes that I already buy. It tells you 80% recycled material, 90% recycled material. We see that on a lot of, it's called craft box paper type. It's that darker brown you see the box being made out of, okay? That is typically a high percentage of recyclable rate. Okay. It's not all post-consumer. Might be manufacturing facility or some kind of that, but this is kind of where we drive that. This kind of going back on the second point, they will change, companies will change when people start demanding. When you go to a store, just like to going back to my pen example, if everybody in the store buys the $1.50 pen and says, I don't care about child labor, okay, all of us do that, this company is going to go out of business. And then all the other companies are going to say, consumers tell us they care about child labor, but even when they hear about child labor, they don't give a darn. They'd rather save the 50 cents. So when you go to the grocery store, the power is with you. Do you change your behavior to start buying things that have more recycled content, that are more recyclable? Do we reward those, or do you say, no, I don't care? If you don't care, companies are not going to care. Companies are starting to care now because consumers, the millennials and all these kind of new consumers are changing their behaviors. That's why companies care. I hope I've answered your question. I know we're getting at 10 o'clock. I don't know how long I can keep answering questions for as long as you want, but I know you folks probably want a break throughout your long day.
We can take questions for a few more minutes. We've got, according to our time schedule, we take questions through 10:15. So keep the questions coming.
Perfect. I see some in the chat. Let me just make sure yeah.
Next question.
Maybe it was such a great presentation, I answered all your questions before you had them, or it was such a boring presentation, you tuned it out and you've been, watching something else on the side or answering email. I completely understand.
I don't think that's the case at all. I had a question. You were talking about keeping data, keeping up with, the percentage of sustainable practices, by particular companies. Do you see this, being used in advertisement? How important is it that the consumer, receive this information through advertisement?
So there's a lot of research on this that shows, so companies that have a purpose actually grow and improve faster, better than companies that do not have a purpose, that are not kind of this purpose led. This is kind of outside research, not kind of my own work. And getting onto the second point is, yes, we're going to start seeing it. If you go to the store, you're going to start seeing, made with, there's a lot of brands. So this is made with ocean recovered plastics. Okay, this is made with post-consumer recyclable materials. And so it's out there. We just need to kind of change our behaviors. Let me see if I can kind of pull one out for you folks relatively quickly.
So it's really important that we as instructors kind of expose our students to the importance of sustainability.
Absolutely. And kind of honestly, that's why I kind of did it here, what we talk about. And that's the goal. If I can share my screen one more time here. And this is, I think you folks can see my mouse, right?
Yes.
This is what we were talking about here as the post-consumer. So this is, and verified by third party, this is 25% post-consumer recycled. So we're going to start seeing this. And then as a consumer, we can kind of make that decision. We can make that choice. And so, I want to show you kind of the 7 types. There we go. So I guess I should have this as part of my presentation, but this is the 7 different types of plastic. And there's a very good picture, if I can kind of play right there. It is of the type, and so it kind of helps you understand, think about where it is. Like the yogurt type 5 is starting to get recycled. Plastic bags are not recycled through typical recycling chains. We got to take them back to the store, and they go into a special thing, and it's very expensive and it's very hard. Okay, just like it's hard to put people in space, it's hard to recycle certain types of plastic. Okay, and so really 1 and 2 are the only ones that we typically recycle that are economically viable to be recycled. Like, technically, everything is recyclable.
We have a question in the chat from Dale Caldwell. Do you think that greenwashing will be kept under control? It's easy to put carbon neutral on a label, but is the restoration mitigation actually occurring? Yeah,
so I'm going to go back to this because, again, I found this on the fly, but I think this is a good example of that. I think it was Dale with a wonderful question. There's going to be the need for third-party certifications. And this is maybe another opportunity for where the government steps in. I cannot write on my product if I'm selling it, this is my reusable coffee mug, but let's pretend, it's a single use. I can't write, will cure cancer on this and then sell it to consumers, right? You'd go to jail as a company, you'd have to shut down because, hey, it doesn't cure cancer. So you cannot advertise something you're not doing. The same thing, companies will not be able to advertise, hey, this is net zero if we're not doing it. So that's kind of, especially now what we're saying, the government will step in to say, you can't talk about something if it's not there. Beyond that, right now, because sustainability has been a relatively new concept, there's been third-party certifiers, okay, that certify what your CO2 emissions, what it looks like, and what your content is. So there are, you can't just have a brand. And so I'll give you one, hopefully you've all seen this. Okay, the Fair Trade Alliance. Have you seen this on products? Okay, you can't just take that and slap it on your product if it's not fair trade certified. Okay, and so we will start to see more and more of these labels become regularly accepted by consumers. And then as they're regularly accepted by consumers, they figure out what is more important, what's more valuable to them. And then it can kind of on the flip side, the government's going to prevent people from saying, oh yeah, it's just like, I can't put on my coffee mug, oh, this cures cancer if it's not there. So that's how we're going to avoid this issue of greenwashing. There's a lot of research out there that shows, when companies actually are involved in greenwashing, they get slammed pretty hard. I hope I answered that question.
Yes. Next question. Go ahead and unmute and ask a question.
Franklin here. I just wanted to ask in terms of, this idea of global warming. Now, the fact of the matter is, you're not going to gain international cooperation simply because there's unevenness in terms of development. So this has been a challenge all along as to why some countries will want to abide by some of these accords that they have, for example, the Paris Accord. It's quite understandable. I think for the West is to understand why the South, I would say the South in terms of developing countries, why they resist this the effort, to control global warming, do a lot of environmental control. So technologically, politically, economically, and otherwise, they are not at the same level as when you talk about the West or perhaps the developed countries.
So Franklin, I agree with you 100%. Okay, I don't think it's fair that we apply our standards to companies, to countries and individual societies that are at a different point in their economic growth cycle. I think what we need to do is we need to get our own house in order first. Okay, since we live in the developed world, or for lack of a better word, I know there's different conversations kind of on what we use now, but that's the onus is on us. Rather than trying to worry about other people and restricting other people, let's just worry about what we're doing, okay, and how we can do. And the goal is that as we shift and more accelerate towards a carbon-free economy, others will start to see the value in that, okay? For instance, we think about this concept of electricity, right? And so if you think of, well, how did we do it? Okay, well, in the 1800s, we built a coal power plant. We bought a lot of coal. We trucked or shipped that coal there, and then we burned that coal, and then that coal fed electricity to people. Okay, Well, if right now, if I look at a place in the developing world that has no power, is that what they should do? Forget sustainability, forget what we feel, forget carbon emissions. And the answer probably is no. In 2022, there's better solutions than that. They can put in solar panels. They can put in wind turbines. There's new wave turbines if they're by the water. And that is a single investment now that has a little bit higher cost. I concede it's more expensive than a coal plant, but the cost is decreasing and it's decreasing fast. So instead of them putting in a coal plant, maybe they put solar panels. Well, solar panels don't work at night. You're right. But battery technology storage now is so cheap compared to where it was 5 years ago, 3 years ago, and it will continue to drop in price. So now if I was responsible for electrifying a remote village in a part of the world that doesn't have electricity, I wouldn't put a coal power plant and hook up electricity there. No, I'd put little mini solar generator panels on each of the rooftops. And then I would have a centralized solar or wind farm that had battery storage that would feed people energy at nighttime. That is the best solution we can put in 2022. And that solution does not need coal. And so when we say, oh, don't use coal, we're putting blinders on and we're being very short-sighted. We're saying, oh, this is what we did. You know, that's what you should do. No, what is the best technology? What is the best solution today? And how can we empower? How can we build people to put that best solution? So as we in the developed world accelerate our shift toward carbon-free emissions, the price of solar panels is going to keep dropping. The price of battery storage is going to keep dropping. New technologies that we simply do not know, cannot understand, cannot fathom, will be developed to allow us to harness. We call it battery storage now, but maybe it's called fuel cell, something else that we can just, there's some nascent company starting that up. And that now is a way we store the energy. That is a way now, that is the best way. And that's what we would want new houses in 2025 and 2030 in the developed world to have. That same technology we can take, and instead of saying to the people in the developing world, oh, you buy a coal power plant and you put it in, we'll have this conversation in 50 years. Franklin, we take that new technology that we know we have, we want, we adds value, and we give it, we help them use that. And now the whole world is in this together. That's what I mean. Let's worry about our own house. Let's get our own house in order. I hope I answered your question.
Very good. We've got 4 minutes left for additional questions. Anyone chime in? Also, please feel free to add some feedback about the session into the chat. I know that Raj likes to include specifics in the feedback that he gives to the federal government. Okay, so additional questions. Anyone? Anyone?
You know, if I'm going to leave you with one thing on this, I can find it here. Kind of, it gets to the same point that, you know, Franklin had asked about, you know, what we look at. And what we need to do is, instead of thinking of economics as this kind of one direction, one thing, there's really this new concept of donut economics, okay? And it's how do we have enough to have a good footing for society, but stay within our ecological environmental boundaries, okay? Through our freshwater withdrawals, what pollutions we're, you know, putting into the water, into the ocean, depleting the ozone, climate change, because these are, at the end of the day, are all interrelated. And, you know, and I hope if you take one thing away from today's talk is that this is all linked, okay? And it's not tackling one problem or one issue, and it's not just saying, oh no, we can't do it, it's tough. It is tough, you know, but hard work never killed anybody. And I think we have this opportunity now in our generation, as our society, to be the generation that really shifts how we've been looking at things and how we can continue to operate within the environmental boundaries of our planet. So I really appreciate you all folks listening. I thank you very much for taking some of your precious time and sharing that with me today. I hope you found some value in the conversation we had. And yeah, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Dr. Awaysheh, that was a fascinating session. Thank you so much for being with us and giving us all of this valuable information. Everybody, we will break for 15 minutes. We will reconvene here at 10:30. 10:30, everybody. Thank you again.
Thank you,
Dr.
everybody.
Awaysheh. Wonderful. Thank you so much.